2019, a year full of opportunity, adventures, growth, and change. A lot happened in 2019, and there was certainly more ups than there was downs. Although we had restrictions on travel this year, we sure did make the most of our annual leave exploring our own country. We started the year at Home Sweet Home watching the Melbourne fireworks. Then took the family back to Bright, where we did some carpool karaoke the entire car trip, swam in the waterfall during a storm again, saw some kangaroos fighting, and took plenty of photos of some hidden gems we found along the way. Celebrated Chinese New Year and had a summer dedicated to photography, shooting landscapes with the U Melbourne crew, and working with some incredible models. Next, we were off to Brisbane, where we hired a car and did some travelling around the Gold Coast. And it certainly would not be a trip to Queensland without making a quick stop at Surfers Paradise. We celebrated Australia Day in South Bank, where we watched an incredible firework display from the water, forced ourselves to see at least one sunrise, and soaked up as much vitamin D as we could before Term 1 commenced. Hosted my first photo walk of the year, where we rescued Abby's tripod from the Yarra River, and I had my camera taken off me to be used as a prop all night. Who knew at the end of 2019 my most liked photo on Instagram would have been captured from my mobile phone that night. Headed out to Phillip Island, where we finally flew my drone and also crashed the drone. Captured an amazing sunset at one of the riskiest locations I had ever shot at, where Nick and I got lost on the way back trying to find a shortcut to the car park in the pitch black. Went to Pink Lake several times, including during an incredible sunset. Next, it was time to soak up the last of summer at Moomba Festival, where I captured the fireworks every single night. Next road trip was to the Dandenongs, where we finally photographed Alfred Gardens and spent 30 minutes trying to get a group photo on South Timer. We caught a very hazy sunset next at Sky High, but we still managed to make the most out of it. Finally made the expensive switch from Canon to Sony before our big road trip. We had 1 week to make the most out of Australia, and we started the trip back at our favourite Victorian town, Bright. After years of wanting to photograph the waterfall rather than choosing to swim, we got all the way to the waterfall only to find I had no battery in my camera. Lucky enough, by the end of the stay at Bright, I was granted 15 minutes after a big rainfall to go back and get some shots. Next up, after an entire day on the road, we reached the oh so rewarding Blue Mountains. We stayed at the most beautiful antique hotel and captured our second sunrise of the year, which was the most amazing experience. Went to Scenic World and rode on the world's steepest train multiple times, saw the Three Sisters, and then spent sunset at Flat Rock, where I took the most daring photo I had ever taken. The next morning, we were chasing waterfalls before jumping back in the car to explore some of Sydney's western suburbs, and then making our way to the coast to explore Wollongong for the very first time. Despite what some may say, we fell in love with the town after all of our overnight adventures. Next day, we headed down the coast, exploring each little township on the way to Merimbula. I have spent years talking up the boardwalk at Merimbula to Hamish, and when we arrived, it certainly did not disappoint. It even landed in my top 5 sunsets of 2019. Spent the night doing some astrophotography and the next morning showing Hamish around the town before sadly heading back home. Finally let Hamish get his own way with purchasing a new TV after blowing my photo limit on the road trip. And then that night saw an amazing sunset at St Kilda Beach. Went to Williamstown for the very first time and had some great ice cream. And discovered an incredible Melbourne arcade whilst doing some night street photography. Soon enough, the leaves were falling off the trees and it was time for some fall photography. For our first autumn day trip, we headed out to the beautiful Macedon Ranges, where we reached the very busy Avenue of Honour at sunrise before peak hit. We were amazed by the sights of Hanging Rock and all the Macedon Ranges had to offer, before hopping off-road and having a cute picnic lunch in a forest. At this point, it was quite obvious Abby and Nick were a tad confused on why they didn't make the cut to be my 2019 portrait ambassadors. Had so many amazing photo shoots throughout autumn, with some of my favourite shots of the year coming from these months, including these shots where we met some very angry Melbourne tram drivers. Soon enough, all the leaves had fallen off the trees and coats, scarves and umbrellas were out. Sunsets were getting earlier and portraits were getting more dreamier. Snow started falling on the mountains earlier than normal this year, so I took the kids out to Warburton only to find out the snow had melted, but that didn't stop us from having a blast. Took them to show them my second home, including the Rainforest Gallery and the Redwood Forest, where here we spent hours playing with fairy lights leading into dusk. Before we knew it, it was time to fly up to Sydney for Vivid. With only one trip up this year, we still managed to make the most out of it. I knew there was no way I was doing Vivid this year without a model, so I organised my dream Sydney photo shoot with Sol, creating some of my favourite portraits yet. After hearing about a ballerina installation, we decided to try shooting in front of that during the busy long weekend. Shooting in harder conditions than I had imagined, but I was still very happy with how the images turned out, no pun intended. Had our first infinity room experience thanks to Samsung Australia. What an incredible experience that was. And squished in as much of Vivid that we possibly could during our 2-night stay. Per usual, soaked up some sunshine at Manly, visited our first art gallery and finally went to the Japanese gardens before flying back home and trying to wear my bag after realising we shopped too much. It's well and truly over the 7-kilo bag limit. Thanks to Sony, was in the city before sunrise for a photo walk. Never. Again. Filmed a photo hack video with Saffron and did some dance photography before heading off with the crew for some sunset and light trail shots. Hamish started his R.M. Williams collection, and before I knew it, he had a bigger collection than my cameras. Met a new photography group called Good Shot Mate and went on a road trip to shoot Black Spur in the morning before the fog disappeared, and then headed out to the snow for a dreamy shoot. Once again, the snow was a disappointment, but the trip certainly was not. We saw some dingoes and caught an amazing sunset before heading back home. The next day, it was my birthday, where instead of heading to Queensland, instead we had a romantic getaway to Daylesford. Somehow, every year I end up spoiled with freebies and upgrades for my birthday. We were given a deluxe spa package where we had no intention on ending up at. We got an amazing spa room, and I also so happened to receive a free dinner because it was my birthday. Hopefully the birthday luck will never die. Spotted Hamish and I on TV after supporting Georgia at Ninja Warrior, and snuck in some plane spotting for the year as Hamish was asleep on a drive home. Waited over an hour to get a shot of 2 Singapore airline planes aligned, and I was a very happy girl. Went to Brighton for Morris's last week in Australia and got some very touristy photos. Made the most out of the Glow Festival this year after last year only finding out about it 10 minutes before it finished, and spent several hours memorised by the seasoned installation. Saw Hugh Jackman live in concert and was speechless by the entire show, including Keala Settle's performance. Finally went to the National Art Gallery of Victoria and then took off to the Melbourne show to see some of the cutest ducklings, baby goats, big dogs, Cosentino, and rode on some rides. I even watched an entire firework display with no camera gear. Spent the rest of the long weekend at Marysville for a quick escape and some amazing food. Did my last portrait shoot of the year with Lily and her very talented mother, before finding out I was officially starting a new chapter of my life in the entertainment industry. The same night, we unfortunately had to farewell Abby as her time was up in Australia. We enjoyed our last hours at the Melbourne Star and shooting sunset before heading out to a farewell dinner. After a year of getting jealous of my parents' renovations, Hamish and I changed some things up in our apartment, moving our bed to make it feel like we had a new home. Because of this, I now struggle to get out of the bedroom. Purchased my very first new smartphone after years of getting Hamish's hand-me-downs and drove all around Melbourne just to get the limited edition colour. I don't even really like orange, but I did it anyway. Next was the biggest highlight of 2019. After years of talking about going on a family trip to Tasmania, we finally did it over the last long weekend of the year. After taking charge of the trip to ensure it all ran smoothly, it was safe to say everything went exactly to plan. We checked in at what felt like a Vegas hotel and splashed a bit of cash to give mum and dad an amazing start to the trip, whilst us kids stayed closer to the bottom levels. Took in the sights and the city culture at the famous Salamanca market before the rain started. But that did not stop us from exploring the beautiful area and seeing my number one sunset of the year. Our first full day was spent exploring Mount Field, chasing waterfalls and walking beside tall trees. Tasmania officially at this stage became, to me, Australia's most underrated state. We tried to explore Mount Wellington, saw some breathtaking views on the drive up, but the second we parked, the mountain was covered in cloud. The rain still didn't stop us as we went on to adventure and find Secret Falls, a hidden waterfall off our walking track. I kept debating whether or not to go down the muddy hill, not knowing how easy it would be to get back up with my camera gear, but I'm so thankful I made it down. The falls may be small, but it was pure serenity when you realize it's just you and the falls. After recovering from a buffet dinner, the next day we made our way back to Mount Wellington, and once again the view was covered in cloud. It began to snow even though we were a month out to summer. We started to drive back down the mountain and noticed the clouds started to shift. Thankfully, I made a quick U-turn and finally got out to take in the views, whilst everyone else stayed in the car annoyed at my persistence and the cold. Waving goodbye to Hobart, we then travelled north along the coast to our next accommodation in Coles Bay, where once again I could not believe how Tasmania was not talked up more over other Australian states. We explored Honeymoon Bay and the lighthouse before the sun went down, and then was up bright and early the next day to walk up Wineglass Bay and meet some new friends, before heading to Launceston for the final hours in beautiful Tasmania. The trip could not have gone any better. Finally went to the noodle night market and purchased some flying noodles only for content. Although I was very sick and had no voice, it was still an awesome night. It was then the last day of November where I had to pack up my life and say goodbye from the last 7 years. Did my final coach's dance where I choreographed a fun throwback number and ended my last day on a high. Tears aside, the next day was the beginning of Christmas, our favourite time of the year. Ditched our Kmart tree and splashed a bit of cash on a beautiful frosted tree, and by the end of the month had paid more than I could afford on Christmas decorations. Started my first week of my new job and was very thankful, happy and exhausted from all the learning, but that did not stop us from enjoying the Malvern carols and getting out Christmas light looking every night. After well over a year of being told Hamish's surgery had to happen sooner than later, Hamish finally had his next heart surgery. Selfish enough though, he had the cheek to make me cook and clean during the recovery weeks. Lucky enough, we only missed out on a few nights of the Christmas light hunting, and the same week ensured we made it to our favourite carols at Como Park. Had a very fun-filled last week of work before the Christmas break, with the highlight being a trip to the local shopping centre to purchase gifts for kids in need. Hosted the last photo walk of the year and did some street photography to finish off the year. Hamish caught me capturing some Christmas self-portraits before joining in on the fun, and then the next day he caught me eating all of my advent calendars. Before we knew it, it was Christmas, where we spent Christmas Eve at my parents' watching the fireworks, and then spent lunch on one side of the city and dinner on the opposite side. Spent too much of Boxing Day shopping before hopping on the road for our final week of the year. After battling some hot days, we spent almost the entire trip under a tree or in the water. We finally went to the Lotus Garden, which we had driven past for many years, which was simply amazing despite the heat wave. Deliberately didn't bring my camera charger, and my camera was half charged for the trip to ensure every moment captured was worthwhile, and it certainly worked. After 2 years in a row of spending New Year's Eve at home, we finally decided to go back to tradition and spend the night with family, because the year is meant to start in Warburton. After a year full of highs, I am certainly not letting that die. In 2020, I am excited for the real adventures of my new chapter to begin, finally being allowed to travel out of the country, personal development, and to top 2019's year of photography. 2019, what an incredible year. Bring on 2020.